Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the local review body for the 12th of February 2024. Before we go on, I have to apologise, I think, for the delay in getting started. We've had some IT issues this afternoon and we've eventually had to move to a different room to be able to broadcast. So my apologies for that. I think we're lucky it's good afternoon and not good evening at this rate, but there we are. So before I go any further, let me make my usual introductions. First of all, I am Councillor Bob Braun. I am the convener of the local review body. On my right, I'm going to get used to this because we've all moved around. I have Councillor David Illingworth, and on my left I have Councillor Grant Stewart, who's stepping in for us today. We are all three of us members of the planning committee, as we have to be to sit on this local review body. Further to my right, I have Mr. Colin Elliott, who is our legal advisor for this afternoon, and beside him, Mr. Danny Williams, who's out of shot, but he is our communities clerk. To my left, far left, is Leslie Tierney, Mrs. Tierney, who is an independent advisor, who has not had any involvement in any of these cases until they came through for appeal to the local review body. I might also add that Mrs. Tierney is her first day with us today, so I hope it all goes well, and we'll know if she comes back next month. So next item on the agenda is the declarations of interest. So Councillor Illingworth, any declarations of interest?
None.
Councillor Stewart?
None.
Fine, thank you very much. Next item is the minute from the previous meeting, which I'm happy to approve as I'm the only member who was here on that meeting who's here today. So with that all that basic work out of the way, we'll now move to the first item on the agenda, which is number 4.1. This is the appeal to the renewal of permission 20.00985, which is the erection of a farm shop and formation of ancillary parking in principle, land 60 metres east of Tay Cottage. So, Mrs. Tierney, if you could lead us in on that one, please.
Thank you, convener. Just move on. Thanks. So I'll just run through some slides to describe the appeal site to you, and once we've run through those, I'll then give an introduction into the appeal and the paperwork. So this is the appeal site here. It's marked with the star there at the bottom of the screen. Killin itself is probably about 2 miles further to the west there, so you're right round the far side of Loch Tay. And as you can see, to give a bit of context, you're very close by to Loch Tay Caravan Park, and there's quite a bit of development on that loch side of the road. And then as you move west towards Killin, so we're about a couple of miles away from Killin there. Mourness Chapel is probably quite identifiable on that road if you will be familiar with it, just directly on the other side of the road there. Next slide. And then this was the plan that was submitted with the planning application. So the appeal site itself, or the application site and appeal site marked in red, just at the south side there of the A827 road. Blue is obviously the other land and the ownership of the applicant. Slide. And then just zooming into the appeal site itself, it's marked in red here. There is a dwelling house Tay Villa there just to the west as you move towards Killin, an existing access to the site off the A827. I think that's all we need to say about that one. Next slide. And then we've got the photographs. So this is looking west towards Killin. This is from the access point into the site. Bit of growth there on the left-hand side. The dwelling house is in behind that growth there. Next slide. And then this is looking east back towards Kenmore. Again, you can probably see a little bit more of the access into the site there off the main road, with the chapel just very much in the distance there. Slide. And this is from the other side of the road as you look into the site. So this is the access, which is just to the ground itself off the main road, farm access. So it does exist as an access off the road with a gate, and the site is in behind that. And then we'll zoom in closer now. So next slide. And then this is looking closer into the site, the existing gates, and then over the loch to the other side of the loch there. Next slide. This is as you come a bit further into the site. As you can see, it's not really used for anything. It is vacant. There are some scrappy, I would say, post and wire fences around the boundaries of the site, but obviously a couple of old cars there, but very open, not much screening round about it. Next slide. And this is from the bottom end of the loch end of the site, looking back towards the main road. Again, you can see those two cars there. The couple of containers that you see on the left, they're not part of the application. They're basically between the appeal site and the house at the side of the road. Next slide. This is again from the same angle, looking back towards the road, but this is towards the west, towards Cullen, and the house is behind the foliage there. You can see the post and wire fencing. One of the containers, as I said, that's not part of the application site. It's just to give you the context. Next slide. Then that's further again towards Cullen, but that gives you an impression of the wider landscape there. Next slide. And then this is looking back towards the main road, which would, and the boundary on the right hand side where the you can just see the edge of the chapel there coming into view. So you can see where the access into the site is. You're really looking directly at the appeal site here, between that access and where the container is at the left, and then the chapel on the right hand side. Next slide. And this is looking further from the site back towards the main road towards Kenmore. Next slide. And one more just further towards Kenmore to the east, but that just to give you an impression of the surrounding landscape. I think that may be it. So I'll just give you some more information about it. So the appeal site, as we've seen, is 4 kilometres to the east of Cullen, between Loch Tay Highland Lodges and Cruachan Farm Caravan and Camping Park to the east, and Moornish House and High Cregan Caravan and Camping Park to the west. Permission was first granted 15 years ago, with 5 subsequent renewals being granted for the development in front of you. And that was to allow the business to grow, remain in the family, and allow farmers and growers to sell direct to consumers and who also want to know more about how their food is produced. And it would allow job retention on the farm, likely to create between 2 to 3 full-time equivalent jobs. The difference here is that we now have a change in policy framework with the introduction of MPF4. So that's fundamentally changed the way the application should be assessed. And the reasons for refusal in this case, firstly, proposal is contrary to policy 13, sustainable transport of MPF4, as the proposal is likely to only be accessible by private car and fails to provide for, firstly, direct, easy, segregated and safe links to local facilities and communities via walking, wheeling and cycle networks, and secondly, accessible transport, ideally supporting the use of existing services. And the other reason for refusal, number 2, the proposal is contrary to policy 29, rural development of MPF4, as no detailed current information has been provided to demonstrate how the proposed development relates to the current operation of Moornish Farm, and to demonstrate how the proposal contributes towards the viability, sustainability and diversity of the rural community and local rural economy. Furthermore, the site is remote and likely to only be accessible by private car and therefore fails to contribute towards local living. There's no provision for sustainable transport access. Finally, reason for refusal 3, the proposal is contrary to policy 30 of tourism of MPF4. In particular, criteria 1, as there's no up-to-date supporting information on the contribution which the proposal would make to the local economy, and criteria 4, as no information has been presented on opportunities for sustainable travel or any consideration of traffic generation or scope for sustaining rural public transport services. So in assessing the application, in terms of how the planning service assessed the application, Policy 13 also highlights the need to ensure that development proposals have been considered in line with sustainable travel, but no detail has been provided on the likely traffic generation given the relatively remote nature of the site and the distance from Killin, and the majority of users will likely travel by private car. There is also no existing footway network on the A827 and no core path network in the local area either. The site is not located within close proximity to allow use by the local population, which accentuates the concerns that the majority of users will access the site by private car. There are campsites and holiday accommodation properties within the Moornish area, but these are considered to be rather nucleated and on-site facilities with limited walking or cycle linkages. Policy 29 of MPF4 seeks to encourage rural economic activity, including farm crofts, diversification of existing businesses, product and processing facilities for local produce and materials, essential community services, essential infrastructure, reuse of brownfield land, small-scale developments that support remote or home working, and improvement or restoration of the natural environment. While it can be considered as diversification of an existing business, there's no up-to-date information on how the proposal will contribute towards the viability, sustainability and diversity of the rural economy, community and local rural economy. Policy 30 seeks to encourage, promote and facilitate sustainable tourism which benefits local people. Policy 30 is no up-to-date information that's been provided on the contribution which it would make to the current local economy, given the changes which have occurred since the original approvals. Neither has any information been submitted on opportunities for sustainable travel or any consideration of traffic generation or scope for sustaining rural public transport services. So turning to the appellant's case, this states that the history surrounding the case is relevant and the previous permission had not expired at the date the application was made. That delays with the project have been due to funding challenges, that the development directly relates to the farm and will have a positive impact, that the nature and scale of it is compatible with the surrounding land, that there is no impact on amenity or adjacent land uses, there's no objection from the roads department, that it does not represent unsustainable travel as it directly accesses onto the A827, which is a designated tourist route as part of the Heart 200 touring route, and that most such proposals in rural areas do not have sustainable transport options available, but that this does not mean permission should automatically be refused. There's a further comment that the intent of policy must surely be to maximise opportunities where they exist, not to simply penalise proposals where there are limited opportunities for sustainable travel, and as such, a minor departure from policy would be acceptable. Just some other things to point out. There were 6 letters of objection, which stated concerns about competition, that there isn't a business case anymore, visual amenity and character of the area, and road safety and congestion. And Glenlyon and Lochtay Community Council object, as this can no longer be considered diversification, as much of the farm has been sold off, and that there is no need for it given other similar facilities in the area. To draw all that together for yourselves, obviously there are material considerations in this case, notably the lengthy history of approvals, and that this application was submitted before the previous approval had expired. However, clearly MPF4 has changed how you may look at this proposal in terms of sustainable transport. There are no grounds for refusal on scale and nature of development, so that would need to be balanced against the argument surrounding sustainable travel, given the lack of non-private transport in rural areas, and that this is a naturally well-travelled tourist route. You may also want to consider justification or information in terms of the business to justify any upholding of the appeal. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So open up for questions. Councillor Illingworth, any questions?
Yeah, is it possible with regards to sustainable travel that actually this business will not generate any extra travel, but will merely attract customers who are passing by anyway? Is that a possibility or not a possibility?
I think there's clearly a case that people are going to be travelling by anyway, but what MPF4 is getting at is that you do that sustainably, even in a rural area where, you know, there's maybe not public transport and so on so readily available.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Yep. Councillor Stewart.
Mr. Tierney, I'm wondering, was there any refreshments or any proposals about having electric charging on site?
No, there's nothing that mentions that.
Okay, thank you.
I have no questions. So members, can we now proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Ingworth?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Stewart?
I'm ready to proceed.
And I'm too happy to proceed, so I'll start off with on this one. This was obviously rejected on the reasons stated before us, and there is a history, obviously, of various planning applications coming through. And as I noted, we now have a change in policy. We have now NPF4, which we must take into account. A little bit concerned in as much that, on the one hand, we want to encourage economic development, particularly in rural areas, allow rural businesses to diversify, particularly farms, of course, which are struggling at the moment. But on the other hand, we seem to be saying you can't get there because if you need to use a car, we can't do it. I find that a bit of an odd thing to do. Rural areas need cars to get to them, unfortunately. That's the way it is. And obviously, public transport is obviously very scarce in those areas. So reasons number 1 and number 3, I'm a little bit doubtful for. But in this instance, bearing in mind the number of applications we've had, I would like to feel that we have more information. So my thoughts on this is to refuse the appeal. The applicants obviously have a right to come back within a year without any extra cost. But if they do so, I feel we need to have some form of more detailed business plan of how it's going to operate in conjunction with the farm and with the area around them to explain how the rural community and the rural economy will benefit from this farm shop. As I say, we've had several applications and nothing's happened. There may be genuine reasons for it, obviously, but at this stage, I feel a refusal is in order, and we'll leave it as stated in the papers here. But if they do decide to come back, the applicant, and I do feel we need more information and more of a business plan that we can study and assess more readily. Councillor Ingworth.
Yep, I would move to accept the appeal. I think because it is on the Heart 200 tourist route, because I think most of the business is going to come from traffic that's passing by anyway. So I'm keen to support the appeal.
Fine. Okay, Councillor Stewart, you're on the deciding vote then.
Thank you, Convener. Yes, I concur with your views that we look to support businesses, and particularly in vulnerable rural areas, and we know that farming is in a precarious state with various costs and encouraging to diversify. However, like yourself, I am minded to refuse this, and particularly proposal contrary to 29 of the National Planning Framework.
Yep. Are you happy for the other reasons to stay in place? You mentioned number
yes,
right.
Sorry, yes, I do believe that the reasons for refusal in point 1 and 3 should stand as well.
So
particularly point 2 is the main
one. That's right. Yeah. So Mr. Elliott, we have a 2-1 majority here to refuse.
Yes, catching up, Convener. Yes, yes, majority is to refuse 2-1. Councillor Illingworth, of course, you were indicating, although contrary to policy, you think that there was a reason why to grant it, which was to do with its location within a tourist route. Convener, Councillor Stewart, you were looking to refuse on the basis of the same terms as the refusal, which is 24.5. Only one thing about that, Convener, you said something about a go within 12 months. It probably would change its nature. It wouldn't be a renewal of our permission anymore. because
Okay.
that would all be finished. So I think it would be a full blown. Well, it's already full blown, but it would be a
new application.
categorised differently next time, and it would be
Okay.
a new application with the background, of course.
Yeah.
But it wouldn't be a renewal this time around.
No,
I wouldn't
fine.
be. I wouldn't expect it to
No,
be spread that way.
I'm happy with that. Yeah, but I think we need more information.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So, members, we'll now move on to the second item on the agenda. This is number 4.2, which is change of use of a flat to a short-term let accommodation in retrospect at 81 Balhousie Street in Perth. Pronunciation right this time. So, Mrs. Tierney, if you could introduce that one for us.
Convener. So again, we'll just run through some images. The first one here, just to give you an impression of the location of the property on Balhousie Street. Best points of reference probably being the Asda Superstore there to the west. We are obviously quite close to the town centre here. Small store on Balhousie Street to the south there, which I think you've had a previous appeal on as well, so you will be familiar with the area there. Next slide. And then this was the drawing that was submitted with the application. So the appeal site, application site outlined in red. This is a 4 in a block property, so number 79 on the top floor, number 81 on the bottom. And that gives you an idea of the road network and the general kind of density and pattern of development in the area there. Next slide. And then looking at the front of the property, the appeal property is the ground floor on the left-hand side. So that's with the white door. And as you can see, the 3 other properties, one other one on the ground floor and 2 on the top floor. And then just directly off the main road there, a parking area to the front of the appeals site. Next slide. This is the floor plan of the property. So as you've seen on that photograph, the property has its own front door directly to the front, and that leads straight into the flat here, as you can see. Living room, kitchen, bathroom and 2 bedrooms. Next slide. This is the side view of the property where you can see the separate access to the upper property on the side of the building there. Next slide. And then just a closer image of the front of the property there with its own separate front door and the parking area. Next slide. This is just taken a little bit further back. The appeal site is behind the landscaping there at the front beside the line, but it's just to give you an impression of just wider area there. It's all very, very similar properties along all the roads in that area. So it's relatively dense. Next slide. And then this is round the back of the property. So the double set of full length window doors there onto the garden area. So that's direct access from the living area into the garden, which directly abuts the neighbouring property on the other side as well at the ground floor. Next slide. Now that's just looking the other way to the rest of the garden and the upstairs property, their gardens on the fence. But again, in the distance, you can see relatively high density residential properties round about. Next slide. And again, that's just another view which shows the appeal property just on the left-hand side there with the fence, but just the proximity of the neighbouring properties and the type of density we've got round about there. That may be it. Yeah, okay. So just an introduction and background to this appeal. It's a change of use of flat to short-term let accommodation in retrospect. It's a 2-bedroom ground floor flat located in a 2-storey 4 in a block flatted building in a residential neighbourhood on the west side of Balhousie Street, north of the city centre. It is accessed by a private door on the front of the building and has in curtilage parking and a rear garden. The Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November 2023 and is a material consideration. This application was determined after the 1st of November. We're obviously therefore now moving into a period where most of the appeals we may be considering here could continue to be determined without any further deferral as they were received after that date. As you know, the guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact the loss of that residential property has on the availability of housing for local people, and in particular access to affordable housing. The guidance outlines matters to be considered in the assessment of planning applications, including whether the property is within a predominantly residential area and there could be an adverse impact on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared or communal entry. It also states proposals must comply with all relevant local plan policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking, which states that development must contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. So the two reasons for refusal in this case: that the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30, Tourism Clause E of NPF 4, as the proposal will result in, firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and secondly, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And the second reason for refusal: that the proposal is contrary to NPF 4, Policy 14C, Design Quality in Place, and Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of residents, and the short-term let use is not compatible with the amenity and character of the established surrounding residential development. So the assessment of the application by the Planning Service noted that the flats here are otherwise in private residential use, and the short-term let could erode that residential character and amenity on a cumulative basis, and it is therefore incompatible with the block of 4 flats and the established surrounding residential development. The short-term let use and movement through the turnover of guests will have a detrimental effect on existing residents and associated adverse impact on the safety and perceived safety of those residents. The intensification of the short-term let use would exacerbate the situation. The intensification of use and movements and the potential for noise would adversely impact the amenity of neighbouring residents and would alter the private residential character. Any measures put in place to manage and control bookings would not guarantee to stop or prevent antisocial or noisy behaviour occurring or from impacting adversely on the amenity of neighbouring residents, and that this matter could not easily be controlled by planning conditions. In respect of the contribution to the local economy from one property in use as a short-term let, this would be limited, and the loss of this 2-bedroom residential flat is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. So in terms of the case put forward by the appellant, they've stated that they work within the local Perth property market and they've spent time and money renovating the property, which has operated at 95% occupancy since they started using it as a short-term let in May 2022. A lot of the users of the property are in Perth for work, who often stay for longer periods of time. The improvements to this and other properties the appellant rents out are giving them a new lease of life. There's some comment about current interest rates, meaning normal rent is not sufficient to cover costs, and flats like this are common on the market for sale. There is a mix of uses on the street, including a dentist, shop and nursery, so it's not wholly residential. And another similar STL nearby on Malvina Place was approved, which is inconsistent with the decision to use this, and that is actually further away from the city centre. They've also stated that the property has its own parking space and garden and its own front door. There's no objections from the neighbours. The appellant is willing to work collaboratively with the council to address any concerns and ensure that the development aligns with the best interest of the community. So for yourselves in determining the appeal, a number of considerations with these STL cases. In this case, as noted, you could consider determining the application in this case because it was determined after the 1st of November when your guidance came into effect. And that means that the development management officers who've written the report have already considered that. You would only defer unless you particularly wanted the appellant to specifically comment on it. The impact on amenity and character of the area in terms of MPF4 is clearly the main consideration, and also the non-statutory guidance. This is a higher density area, but perhaps not in the same vein as a very high density flatted development. But nonetheless, you should still consider it as an intensification of use, a commercial type use rather than private residential use. Obviously, some consideration, the access to the property is not communal. It does have its own front door and dedicated parking and garden area. And as with all these applications and the comments that come from consultees, so in this case, the housing team, considering the impact of the loss of private residential accommodation in Perth, where that's less of an issue, and what the cumulative impact could potentially be, and then also consideration of the economic benefit can be brought. There, as we said, there's no third-party objections. Environmental Health had no objections. There was some reference as well to the recent appeal decision at Burnham, which is to do with obviously it being very difficult to control guidelines for guests and management and so on by planning condition. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions, Councillor Stewart?
Thank you, Convener. It's clearly this property was built as a residential property, and thinking about the three of us being on the planning and placemaking and 20-minute communities. I saw in one of your slides about a corner shop, but there's also a superstore. And I guess we kind of gravitate towards thinking about employment within the town centre, but I'd be right in thinking we've also got a fairly new educational facility, 5-10 minutes walk. But I'm pretty certain going out in Inveralmond Week would be about a 20-minute walk. So there's all the employment opportunities that are within a walking distance. Am I right in thinking that?
I mean, the 20-minute neighbourhood policy, which has been introduced by MPF4, is also a material consideration. You may want to consider that. I would say that policy is more to do with new residential development rather than commercial development. So it's more about making sure where people live and work, they have those amenities close to hand, rather than a commercial use like this.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Councillor Inglis.
No questions.
I just have one, just to clarify on the parking issue. The picture you showed at the front of the house, the two spaces, I think, is that?
Mm-hmm.
Is that purely for that flat?
Yes.
Yes, so the other flat has it to the
Yes,
side.
it
So
does.
there are two allocated flat.
Yes.
Okay, fine, that's my question. So with that then, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Stewart.
I'm ready to proceed.
And Councillor Inglis.
Happy to proceed.
I too am happy to proceed. So Councillor Stewart, you can kick off on this one for us.
Thank you, Convener. I am minded to carve with Mr. Littlejohn's letter of refusal on point 1, policy 30 of the National Planning Framework 4, and point 2, National Planning Framework 4, policy 14C. Perth and Kinross Council Local Development Plan 2, policy 1A, not including the 1B cited in the letter of refusal, and the placemaking policy 17D.
Okay. I'm going to be a little bit different, I think, on this one. This is unusual. We have a flatted property before us, which has its own entrance, which is unusual, and also has 2 car parking spaces in front of it. It's not a normal situation for flats. Obviously, they're normally a communal entrance, but this one hasn't got that. Excuse me. So I'm also taking into account the fact that it's very close to the city centre. Separate parking. There's been no objections raised by anybody living nearby. So I'm of a mind in this case, because it's slightly different, to grant the appeal with all the usual conditions that may come with it. Councillor Lingworth.
I'm happy to grant the appeal. I would cite the same reasons as you, convener.
So, Mr. Elliott, we have a majority of view again. This time to accept.
Yes, thank you, Convener. Just writing that down. So majority, yes, you won't read the handwriting. Yes. Majority is to grant, and Convener, of course, I think you've indicated, I think essentially, am I correct in saying you think it accords with policy because of the reasons you outlined about having separate parking, close to neighbourhood, close to, you know, yes. And the Councillor Stewart was going to refuse in line with the reasons for refusal in the papers.
Yeah.
So yes,
he said a slight amendment as well to the condition.
Yes, there was. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fine. Thank you very much. So we'll now move on to item 4.3, which is not a short-term let this time. It's the in principle erection of a dwelling house, land 50 metres north of the Stack House, Hatchbank, Kinross. If you could introduce that one for us.
Thank you, convener. And we'll just run through some images and photographs. So this is the location of the appeal site. As you'll be well aware, Kinross there over the east side of the M90, and we're on the west side here along Hatchbank Road, towards a cluster of existing properties there on the north and the south side of Hatchbank Road. The appeal site is indicated there with the yellow star. So that is a relatively open field in front of some of the properties, but as you can see, towards the east, some properties are located directly abutting Hatchbank Road, and there's a number of properties on the other side as well, along with some trees. Next slide. This is one of the plans that was submitted with the planning application. The red line indicates the site boundary and includes the access of the public road to the north side there into the site. And then you can also see some of the surrounding properties there that exist further back from the public road, but as you'll see, a variety of curtilage sizes and plot sizes and so on. But Back House, Oakbrae, Stone Axe House, all larger curtilages. Next slide. And then again, this is just another drawing of the outline of the site there, and the access of the public road. Anna Fruch Cottage is to the east, and I'll come back to that in some of the information that's been submitted by the appellant. Next slide. So this is as you look back towards the M90 towards the east. This is the western edge, if you like, of the cluster group of existing properties. The 3 larger properties with the larger curtilages just at the front of the image there. And as you can see, an open site on this side of the road, which is to the west side of the access into the appeal site, and then this dike that runs along the roadside, and then trees on the other side of the road. Next slide. And this is as you come closer towards the site, towards the M90. This is the access into those 3 properties, and also would also be to the appeal site. As you can see there, the dike continues to run along the road, post and wire fencing along the western boundary of the site, and then existing landscaping along the boundary of the neighbouring properties. Next slide. And then coming closer into the access into the appeal site, so you can see the proximity of the neighbouring properties and the kind of setting, I suppose, and boundaries that exist at the site. Next slide. And this is moving towards the M90, looking directly into the appeal site now, over the dike wall that runs along the road into the application site, which is open right up to the point of property on to the side. Next slide. And then this is now looking at the appeal site from the M90 side towards the west, with the dike wall that runs along the road, and the site is effectively in behind that tree that you can see in the middle there. You're starting to see, as you move east here, that some of the gardens and properties are now moving closer towards the public road. Next slide. And then again, that's pretty much taken from the same spot, but looking in the opposite direction to illustrate the proximity of some of the other properties right next to public road as you move in the opposite direction. And into the left there, where the other access is, there's a number of houses, as you saw in the aerial photograph, number of houses on the north side of the public road there. Next slide. This is looking from back onto the public road, up the access road that would come into the site. The timber fencing and landscaping that you see on the right there, that's the boundary of the neighbouring property, the closest property. And then the application site further towards the public road. Next slide. And then this is what I was referring to earlier. This was a plan that was submitted by the appellant, the review site there, right in the middle, indicated by the dashed red line, to try and illustrate the size of the shape of the site being similar to some of the neighbouring properties, some of the closest neighbouring properties, certainly, and a Fruch house, particularly to the east there. I don't think there's any other slides. So just to give you an introduction and background to the appeal, permission in principle for the erection of a house next to the existing group of houses at Hatchbank to the west of the M90 at Kinross. Site is roughly L-shaped, with the public road to the north, residential curtilages to the south, and an existing private access track to the west. A small field exists to the east, which appears to be used as garden ground as part of the neighbouring property. The boundary with this property is less contained, being marked by post and wire fencing. However, there's a low level dike wall between the site and the public road, and hedging to the west along the boundary of the site, and more hedging to the south between the site and the neighbouring house. The report of handling, just for your information, noted that a pre-application inquiry for a larger site than that which has been applied for and is the subject of the appeal was made in 2022, and at that time concerns were raised by the planning service over a slightly larger development which included a further area of land to the west, but that's now been removed from the appeal. So the reasons for refusal, there are 4 of them. I'll read them. By virtue of the site's size and shape and its locational relationship to the existing buildings, the proposal does not respect the existing character or building pattern of the existing group, and it would therefore not contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built environment. Accordingly, it's contrary to policy 1A, placemaking of the adopted Perth and Kinross local development plan and the council's statutory supplementary planning guidance on placemaking, both of which require all new developments to contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. Number 2, by virtue of the site's size and shape and its locational relationship to the existing buildings, the proposal does not respect the existing character or form of the existing building group. The proposal would therefore detract from the visual amenity of the group when viewed from the wider landscape and would not integrate successfully into the existing building pattern of the area. Accordingly, it's contrary to the requirements of Category 1 building groups of Policy 19, Housing in the Countryside, of the adopted Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2 and the Council's statutory supplementary planning guidance on housing in the countryside, both of which require all new housing within existing building groups to respect the character and form of the existing group, be integrated into the existing layout and building pattern, and do not detract from the visual amenity of the group when viewed from the wider landscape. Thirdly, as the proposal is on a greenfield site, but the site is not on an allocated site, and the development proposed is not explicitly supported by policies in the LDP, the proposal is contrary to Policy 9B, brownfield vacant and derelict land and empty buildings of the MPF4. This policy states that proposals on greenfield sites will not be supported unless the site has been allocated for development or the proposal is explicitly supported by policies in the LDP. And finally, that by virtue of the nature of the proposal and the site's size and shape and its locational relationship to the existing buildings, the proposal does not respect the existing character or form of the existing building group, and accordingly it fails to meet any of the specific circumstances listed in Policy 17, Rural Homes of MPF4, and would not result in a development which is in keeping with the character of the area. So in further commentary, the assessment by the planning service, they note that while there is a group of houses, the site is out of character with the existing pattern of development and could have an adverse impact on the visual amenity of the area. It is noted that the building pattern of the group is set back from the road, with the existing houses being separated from the public road by areas of open paddocks, one of which is this application site. It is accepted that there are some roadside properties on the eastern end of the grouping, but that the pattern of the group as you move west is more open. It's noted that the site has little in the way of natural containment to the east, with the boundary of the site having little established natural landscape framework apart from post and wire fencing, and sites must have existing boundaries which form a good landscape framework and are capable of absorbing the development proposed. It's therefore questionable whether the site has a suitable landscape framework. However, it is further noted that the other three sites have more established boundaries and features, and that on balance the site could be considered acceptable from a containment perspective. However, it is the size and shape of the site that does not relate well to the group. They do know that the applicant has said that they can locate the house in the southern portion of the site, but planning remain concerned that this could lead to further development on the other ground. The character of the group, so it is also in conflict with Policy 1A and the associated supplementary guidance on placemaking. So in terms of the appellant's case, they've stated that the size and shape of the site does fit in with the character of the area, that the existing house and garden at Annafruch Cottage to the east is the same size and shape, and other houses have generous plots and gardens, and that this site would not be the biggest. The site is smaller than some other plots in the group. The site is also definable with well-established boundaries, including the farm stone wall along the main road and farm access and mature trees to the north side of the public road, and the planning service acknowledged that the site could be considered as well contained. The supplementary planning guidance states that extensions are permissible where sites are readily definable, formed by existing topography, roads or well-established landscape features, such as watercourses or mature tree belts, which will provide a suitable setting. And it's argued by the appellant that in this case, that's the case with this site. They would be happy to accept a condition that there's no development to the front or north side of the plot to preserve an open frontage. In terms of other matters, all other technical and environmental matters appear to be acceptable, and there's no objections from consultees or from third parties. So I suppose the consideration here for the LRB is whether the site is an appropriate addition in terms of its size and shape, and whether there is an appropriate location within the site boundary to locate a dwelling house. Although there's no issues with anything technical or environmental, obviously if the appeal was upheld, there would need to be a condition regarding the submission of drainage information to demonstrate that 125% betterment in terms of phosphorus loading can be achieved, and that this should indicate no adverse impact on the SPA, and there would also need to be conditions for visibility and landscaping. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Illing, any questions?
I have no questions.
Councillor Stewart?
Thank you. No questions.
I just have one technical question, I think. When it comes to the site, I know it's been mentioned in the papers about the potential for, once the principal's there, to build another property in. I think this question has come up before, but I'll ask it. Can we condition one property only on the site? Or if that's not the case, can we record our intent that if we decide to approve it, it was our intent that only one property would go on the site? Is that possible?
It has been done before, where it's been indicated as a condition that it's for a maximum one dwelling house only. The description kind of takes care of it anyway here, because you've got erection of a dwelling house singular. But bear in mind, if you put a condition on, they can always apply to change that condition.
Yeah.
But that would have to be assessed at a later stage.
Right. Okay.
So I think the description takes care of it here.
Fine.
The erection of a dwelling house.
Okay, fine. Okay, members, there's no more questions then. Can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us, that is, the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth, are you happy to proceed?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Stewart?
Ready.
And I too am happy to proceed. So, Councillor Illingworth, if you could start us off on this one.
Yeah, I'd like to grant. I think the dwelling house as proposed fits in with the building group, and the building group is boundaried by the track leading from the main road.
Happy to
That's
bring
it.
up.
Yep, happy to.
Councillor Stewart?
I'm minded to go against our planning officers and know that with my colleague, Mr. Illingworth, that the property boundary is bounded by a track and a public road and the gardens of the other properties.
Yep, that's how you feel. Yep.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, fine. Okay, well, I'm going to join you on this one. I too agree that this should be accepted. The appeal should be accepted. I think I agree that the group is bounded by the track. I appreciate other properties slope away, but I think it forms part of the group. There was a question, Mr. Elliott, about it being a house, which we're approving, so that's fine. So I'm happy to grant the appeal as well. I do feel we need to have obviously usual conditions put in, but I think bearing in mind the location, condition regarding phosphate mitigation, landscaping and biodiversity, I think need to go in as well. But apart from that, the usual conditions for that one. So it's a unanimous decision on this one. First one of the day.
So, Convener, yes, that's unanimous. Grant subject to suitable conditions and informatives. Bear with me a second. I'm going to pass over to the planning advisor here as to whether there's anything more to raise in terms of conditions. I know I can think of one, which is whether members want to condition it such that any house will not be bounding the public road. So in line with the rest of the building groups, whether you want to put that on or not. But I'll pass over to Mrs. Tierney. Is there anything you want to raise in terms of conditions?
No, that's a fair comment. If you do want to specifically say which part of the site you would like the house to be located in, you could do that.
I'd like to do that.
Yep. Well, there is a plan that we flashed up which shows a indicative site for the house anyway.
Yes.
So I'm happy with that. We're all happy with that to go with that one. Yep.
Okay, we will work that from there.
Yes.
Okay.
From that, yeah.
Yep.
Okay, fine. So thank you, members. So we now move on to number 4 this afternoon, which is another short-term let, change of use of flat to form short-term let accommodation unit in retrospect at 4 No Head House, Dundee Road, Perth. Mr. Tierney, back to you again.
Thank you, convener. Through drawings and images. Again, this is the overhead aerial. Just to give you an idea of the location of the appeal site. So very central, obviously, within Perth on the west side of the river there, in between the two bridges there on the Dundee Road. I don't think there's much more to say about that. You can get the impression of where the property is. Next slide. And then some images from one of the plans that was submitted with the application. So obviously the red line outlines the application and appeal site boundary. So it looks a bit odd here, but it's fundamentally the outline of the property and also the private garden area and the parking and the access to the property. Next slide. And then this is just looking a bit more closely at that. So the building there has a number of flats within it. The red line outlining the exact property, shared entrance, the car park off Dundee Road, parking space that goes property, and a private garden area as well there. Next slide. So this is the building in question, obviously Dundee Road there, access into the 5 flats that are within the property, and the arrow indicates it's the first floor here that we're dealing with, and obviously there's another property on the first floor there. What you see underneath that arrow is another property. And on top of that is an outdoor area of space which is accessed directly from the appeal site, which we'll see in another couple of slides as well to give you other angles. Next slide. This is the floor plan of the property. So the main entrance door there is a communal access to 4 of the flats, and from one of the bedrooms and the living area, there's direct access onto this large balcony area, which is the roof of one of the other properties. Next slide. So this is down along the riverside, basically looking back up at the property. Obviously, you'll see it's a large building that's been converted into 5 flats. And as you can see here, again, that external area that sits directly accessed from the flat there to that balcony area. Next slide. Coming in a bit closer, where you can see the front of the property, the grass and the hedge at the front there, that's the garden area that goes with the property. And then you can see maybe more closely now the glass balustrade around the balcony area that's part of the property. Next slide. And then this is looking back at the property. So here there's a yellow line between 2 of the upper floor windows. So that's the boundary between this flat and the neighbouring upper floor flat. And then just in between these hedges at the ground floor, the properties on the ground floor have direct access out to the garden areas. Next slide. And then this is just an image of the communal door, which accesses 4 of the flats in the property. And then this is the parking area, and that grass area and hedging is the garden that goes with it. And then that's just the parking space, communal parking area. So, yes, the appeal site is at 4 Nowhead House, which is a Category B listed building located on Dundee Road, Perth, within Kinross area. It was converted to 5 flats in 2017. 3 floors within the building, lower ground, first floor. 4 of the flats contain 2 beds, 2 bedrooms, and 1 is a single bedroom unit. The site is one of the 2-bed units. And also includes obviously the large kitchen, dining, living area that can be used for additional accommodation. Flat, as you've seen at first floor, shares a landing with the 1-bedroom flat. The roof terrace or balcony is accessed off the living area and from one of the bedrooms. There are 10 parking spaces shared between the 5 flats. The proposal would not change access to the property, and it has a dedicated parking area. So the Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November 2023 and is a material consideration. The application this appeal relates to was determined prior to the approval of this guidance. That guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impact of that residential property has on the availability of housing for local people, and in particular access to affordable housing. The guidance outlines matters to be considered in the assessment of a planning application, including whether the property is within a predominantly residential area and there could be adverse impacts on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared or communal entry. It also states that proposals must comply with all relevant LDP policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking, which states the development must contribute positively to the quality of the surrounding built and natural environment. So the reasons for refusal, two of them, that the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30 Tourism Clause E of MPF 4 of the proposal will result in, firstly, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and secondly, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And then the second reason for refusal, that the proposal is contrary to MPF 4, Policy 14C, Design Quality in Place, and Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, Policies 1A and 1B, Placemaking, and Policy 17D, Residential Areas, as the increased activity, noise and disruptive behaviour caused by users of the short-term let adversely impacts on the amenity of neighbours, and the continuation of the short-term let is not comparable to the amenity and character of the existing residential development. So turning firstly to the assessment of the proposal by the Planning Service, it's acknowledged that the proposed use of the property as a short-term let would not be significantly different from use solely as a flat in terms of its physical appearance. However, the concerns about the level of activity being increased by short-term let use seems to be borne out by the letters of objection. Even without the letters, the use of shared communal areas, a communal stairwell and inconsiderate use of the roof terrace and hot tub contributes to the disturbance and is having an adverse impact on local residential amenity. And it's therefore considered that the use of the property is incompatible with the character of Nowhead House as a residential property. It is also considered that the proposal would only contribute to a limited extent to the tourism market in this part of Perth and Kinross, and as set out by objectors, could potentially just redistribute business that could have gone to other tourism accommodation providers, although there is no evidence to back up this view. While the loss of the residential unit would occur without detriment to local housing availability, this loss is not outweighed by any expected economic benefits. So the case that the appellant has forward is that this property is a luxury short-term let contributing to Perth's visitor and tourism sector, that they have represented Perth and Kinross at the council's own photo shoot for advertising premium accommodation, that the works they have done to the property have improved it, that there is a noise management plan in place which occupiers have to abide by. There is CCTV for residents to ensure their safety and well-being, that there is a low level of short-term lets in Perth, which is below the national average, and the development therefore does not impact on the availability of housing or the character of the neighbourhood, that the title deeds cover and allow for the communal use of the building, including that the flats may be used for short-term lets, and all owners have agreed to this, that there is little accommodation available in Perth, particularly in the summer months. They highlight local businesses and attractions which will benefit from visitors to Perth who stay in the property, and that it has its own parking and is in a sustainable location. Some other matters to bring to your attention: there was no objection from environmental health, and the property would obviously be subject to licensing conditions. The Communities Housing Strategy team state that the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets for this area is 1.1% and below the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of short-term lets where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. There were 7 objections received to this application, raising the following matters: impact on residential amenity from noise, particularly from the roof terrace, hot tub parties, antisocial behaviour, coming and going of strangers in communal areas, security, increase and vulnerability of residents, the outside key safe and litter, concerns over safety of the hot tub in terms of weight, damage, and its installation without discussion with residents, that it is intensive commercial letting contrary to resident use, that it takes business away from hotels, etc., contrary to NPR4 Policy 30. The loss of this apartment is not outweighed by local economic benefits. Concerns are raised about issues with waste and recycling, parking because guests don't park in the right place. It's badly managed. There's no thought for residents, and there was a question querying the accuracy of the supporting information submitted by the applicant. Obviously, as you're aware, as part of that appeal decision for the case at Burnham, guidelines for guests can't be controlled by planning condition, and therefore management guidelines can't be relied upon as a means to restrict or control the adverse impacts on neighbouring properties and harm to amenity. Furthermore, harm to amenity could arise even if there was effective control due to the frequent turnover of guests. So in terms of your own consideration, as with other cases you've determined, which were submitted prior to the 1st of November, it would be deferred to allow development management to comment in the first instance on the adopted statutory guidance, or non-statutory guidance, I should say, and then for the appellant to comment. So some of these other issues may be discussed in due course, but obviously consider the impact on amenity and the character of the area in terms of NPF4 and the guidance, and consider the objections. Consider the intensification of use as a commercial type use rather than private residential use, and cumulative impact. I need to consider that the access to 4 of these 5 flats is communal. It's a communal door at the rear of the property. Impact on loss of private residential accommodation in Perth. Obviously that percentage is quite low, but it is still a consideration. And the need to consider economic benefits, as although the appellant has provided a statement in support which references a number of business and tourism benefits, there's little evidence that there will be economic benefits accruing from one short-term let, or that would certainly outweigh the loss of this one flat to holiday use. Thank you.
Thank you. Members, before we go to questions, it's been intimated by Mrs. Tierney. The date of the decision notice here in front of me is the 14th of September. And of course, the non-statutory guidance didn't come into play until the 1st of November. In the past, and to be consistent, we have deferred these cases back to development management on the basis that they review the case in light of the non-statutory guidance that now exists and has been approved, and then the applicant has a chance to respond to those comments. So can I ask members, are you happy that we should defer this for further comment? Because I think that'll be considered. Yeah.
Happy to defer.
Right, okay. Mr. Elliott, we're going to have to defer this, I think, to be consistent. I appreciate we've got members of the public behind me. Apologise for rudeness, not being able to face you. And I appreciate this is going to drag on a bit longer before a final decision is made, but we have to be fair to all parties, and we have been fair to others in the past. So in this case, we do have to defer it. I think it's the right way forward. I'm not sure how long that will take, maybe two meetings down the line, we may come back to us, but to be consistent, I'm proposing we defer, Mr. Elliott.
Yes, Commissioner, I think that's unanimous. I'll read it out relatively longhand because I'm taking this from previous deferrals.
Right.
First of all, development management to defer, first of all, for development management to review and comment on the proposal in light of the new non-statutory planning guidance on change of use of residential property to short-term let. Secondly, the applicant to review and comment on the response from development management, as I've narrated, and in light of the new non-statutory guidance, planning guidance on change of use residential property short-term let. And following receipt of all information and responses, the application then be brought back to a future meeting of the local review body, along with a copy of that non-statutory guidance for your information. So it's development management first, applicant to comment, applicant second, and then bring everything back to you.
Correct.
And I would agree with you. I really don't expect to come back for the next one in March. It's more likely to be April or one after May.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you.
Excuse me, if I can just pause for a couple of minutes. I'm just going to show the members.
Yes, of course, yes. We'll have a. I'm back. And welcome back after a few minutes. Members, we'll now move on to item 4.5, which again is a short-term let case. Change of use of a flat to form short-term let accommodation, Unit 4, Kirkview Apartments, Buzzard Hill Road in Pitlochry. So Mrs. Fiona, if you could introduce it for us.
Thank you, convener. Again, aerial image here, centre of Pitlochry with the appeal site denoted by the small yellow star. So you can see Athol Road there, the main road through Pitlochry, just along the bottom of the slide. So we're quite close to the town centre, but as you move up the hill there, up past, you start coming in towards a more dense residential area. Next slide. This is one of the drawings that was submitted with the application. So again, with the red line application site boundary, which goes around the outline of the flat, and also the access off the main road to where the parking for the properties is. Next slide. So this is looking at the property from main road there. It's a fairly new block, as you can see, with 5 flats within it. It's first floor, where the arrow is pointing there. Next slide. This is the first floor plan of the property. You can see the 2 bedrooms and the access into the property through the communal stairwell as well. This was just to show the other properties in the block. This information was submitted, so it was useful. So obviously on the ground floor we've got another 2 flats, and then that's okay, don't worry, and then one in the roof. This is just set further back from the road. We are now starting to look back down towards the town centre. You can see the development there. We start moving towards the town centre. Still residential, but starting to move in towards a more mixed hotels and such like. Next slide. Back up the road. This is the property. We see access off the main road, and the pedestrian access into the property there, just beside the road, and come to the front door of the property. Next slide. Just to give you an impression as you look up the hill, as I said, moving away from the town centre, more residential in nature. Next slide. Closer up image of the access off the main road and the parking areas. Next slide. And just coming around the back of the property again into the parking. Next slide. And then this is a view back of the parking, and obviously the communal bin area at the back there. To the immediate back of the site, there's another flatted development. So a bit higher density, but largely residential as you move up the hill. Maybe the last one. Yeah. Oh no, this is the communal access into the property. So this is change of use of a first floor 2-bedroom flat, short-term let in a detached residential building on Bonnet Hill Road, out with Pitlochry Town Centre, but within Pitlochry Conservation Area. It's accessed via a communal staircase in the centre of the building. 4 neighbouring flats across the 3 floors. The Council's non-statutory planning guidance on short-term lets was approved on the 1st of November 2023 and is a material consideration. This application was determined after the 1st of November, and we're there obviously with this one now moving into a period where you could continue to determine the appeal without deferral. That guidance acknowledges that while short-term lets can bring economic benefits to the host and local areas, this must be balanced against the impacts the loss of that residential property has on availability of housing for local people and in particular access to affordable housing. Guidance outlines matters to be considered in the assessment of a plan application, including whether the property is within a predominantly residential area and there could be adverse impacts on amenity for existing residents, particularly in blocks with shared and communal entry. These proposals must comply with all relevant LDP policies, in particular Policy 1 placemaking. So the reasons for refusal, firstly, the proposed retrospective change of use is contrary to Policy 30E, tourism of MPF4, as the proposal would result in 1, an unacceptable impact on local amenity and character of the area, and 2, the loss of residential accommodation where such loss is not outweighed by demonstrable local economic benefits. And the other reason for refusal that the proposal is contrary to MPF4, Policy 14C, design quality in place, and Perth and Kinross Local Development Plan 2, Policies 1A and 1B, placemaking, Policy 17D, residential areas. If the short-term let accommodation would adversely impact on the amenity of neighbouring residents, the short-term let use would not be compatible with the amenity and character of the surrounding predominantly residential area. The assessment by the planning service was that the proposed use of the property as a short-term let would not be significantly different from a flat in terms of its physical appearance, the extent of footfall or noise emanating from the property. However, the high turnover of guests would likely be higher than typical private rented or owner-occupied accommodation, and this could have an impact on noise and disturbance to neighbours. Whereas such impacts may be offset in town centre or mixed-use areas such as the lower end of Bonnet Hill Road, the same cannot be said for this building, which comprises 5 residential flats further uphill out with the town centre. Whilst a hotel development is located nearby to the south at the edge of the town centre boundary, the immediate neighbouring buildings to the north and east of the application site are residential in nature. The proposed intensification of use and movements would adversely impact the amenity of neighbouring residents within the host building and would alter the existing residential character of this upper part of Bonnet Hill Road. The proposal would result in the loss of a flat to short-term let accommodation in the PH16 postcode area, which is already subject to a proliferation of holiday accommodation, evidenced in the strategy team consultation response. This in turn would adversely impact the availability of residential accommodation locally, and representations have highlighted the knock-on effect this could have on existing staff shortages locally, not only for tourism-related businesses but other essential services. The extent to which short-term let accommodation would benefit the local economy above and beyond typical residential use has also been questioned in the representations. Local economic benefits associated with short-term let proposals need to be demonstrable. However, no supporting documentation has been submitted by the applicant in this regard. Furthermore, even if such documentation had been forthcoming, it is unlikely that economic benefits accruing from one short-term let unit would outweigh the loss of this residential flat to holiday use. So the appellant's case with this appeal, the proposed use will not adversely impact amenity and character of the area on the basis of the following: that no objections were received, that the site is in a mixed use area with short-term let accommodation adjacent operated by Scotland's Hotel, that the most appropriate boundary relative to mixed use and residential use would be beyond the northern boundary of the site, and that the block of flats is within 400 metres of the town centre. There are demonstrable local economic benefits of short-term letting property, as short-stay residents use local shops, restaurants and tourist and recreational facilities. The proximity of the apartment to the town centre reinforces the contributions visitors make to the local economy. And finally, that the proposal is not contrary to MPF4, as permanent occupancy of the apartment would have the same impact relative to residents and vehicle movements and is therefore compatible with the amenity and character of the area, particularly when considered in relation to the mixed use of the area. So other matters, no objections from environmental health. Communities housing strategies, the postcode district level of saturation of potential short-term lets for PH16 is 12% and above the level at which it may be considered appropriate to introduce a control area in order to help manage high concentrations of short-term lets where it affects the availability of residential housing or the character of a neighbourhood. And obviously, whilst the appellant has guidelines in place for use by guests, such guidelines cannot be controlled by planning condition as set out in the recent appeal Burnham decision. I might need to clarify this. I have got here that one objection states that the proposal will exacerbate local housing availability with associated impact for existing staffing shortage, and it will do little for local prosperity, both through limited guest spending and income accruing to owners based elsewhere. I think I previously said there was no objections, but there is one. Considerations here, obviously you can consider determining it, consider the impact on amenity and the character of the area in terms of MPF4 and the guidance. This site is closer to the town centre, so it is more mixed use, or is it more residential as per the properties to the north and east? Obviously a consideration of the communal access to the property, and consider the loss of the property to the local housing market in Pitlochry, where there's much more of an issue with this and associated cumulative impact of the loss of such properties. And then finally, the consideration of the economic benefit of the proposal. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kinross, any questions?
Yeah, two questions. If we were not to grant the appeal, could it be guaranteed that this house would be used just as a second home and therefore only have occupants, say 3 or 4 weeks a year? Could that guarantee be made?
No.
No. Okay. And if we were to refuse the appeal, and it went on as a rental property, could it be guaranteed that it would be affordable housing?
No.
No. Okay. Thank you.
I think that I come in there, communities, understand where you're going, but what it might become is an element of, there are no absolutes as to what it might be. It would be residential, but you couldn't indicate exactly how that residential would take place. But I think that's what you would be concentrating on, is that is changing use to short-term let, not what it might be, but what they're looking to do is changing use to short-term let, and that's the primary focus here. Thank you, Convener.
Okay, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Convener. On the maps that you used, you're referencing it's quite near the town centre where there's a lot of tourist industries as well as businesses, and I suspect there'll be sustainable travel and public transport and the train network. And thinking about what we're discussing here in the paper is the loss of an amenity, and from this apartment flat, from that point on, that's a residential area.
So it is very close to, but as you move from Athol Road up the hill, up Bonnet Hill Road, you're obviously moving away from the town centre where it's very much mixed and commercial uses. The planning service have refused the application in part because as you move up Bonnet Hill Road, in their view, you've reached the point just before you get to the appeal site that it's really fundamentally residential in nature rather than mixed use. It's a very fine line,
yeah.
And it's only a matter of, a couple of 100 metres, but that's the view they've come to. And I think, as you saw, kind of moving up the hill, it does very much change from, the town centre to a more residential area.
Thank you. No more questions.
Thank you. I have no questions either. So, members, can we proceed to determine the application for review on the basis of the information before us? That is the information contained within the papers and the presentation by the planning advisor, or do we require more information? Councillor Illingworth?
Happy to proceed.
Councillor Stewart?
I'm ready to proceed.
And I'm happy to proceed. So it's come round to me again on the rotation. So I'll kick off on this one. And obviously, once again, it's MPF4 policy 30E, which we have to look at. I've been to this area several times. I know that it's quite well. And I would have to, I think, go along to some extent with the planning officer in saying that this property is away from the town centre. It's that bit further. I know the applicant seems to think that the line should be further north, but I'd have to just disagree on that. I think this is outside the reach of the mixed use of the town centre. So I think that's the point to take. It's not a separate entrance to the flat, which is another concern, and obviously a reason why we're looking at it. I can't see any reason that there's an economic benefit here which would outweigh the loss of residential accommodation, and there is likely to be an impact, I think, on local amenity. Looking at the properties around it, I appreciate that the objection that has come in hasn't made any comment about that. It confines itself purely to the loss of accommodation in the area, rather than any problems with noise or whatever. But I think, as we've had from other cases in the past, that the movement of vehicles and luggage, rapid changeover of guests, would not be typical of a residential use, and I think it would change the characteristics of the locality because of the intensification of use and movement. Adversely, it would impact on the amenity for residents around, and there are flats around it. So in this instance, I feel that I'm going to go with the refusal and refuse the appeal and concur with the planning officer's decisions. I think there's a bit of tidy up again on refusal 2, but we'll come to that depending on my colleagues' answer. So, Councillor Illingworth.
Yeah, I'd like to grant the appeal. I think the property is within very, very close to the city centre. It's a busy place with lots of coming and going anyway. So I would like to grant the appeal.
Thank you very much. And Councillor Stewart.
Thank you very much. After reading the papers and Mrs. Tierney's presentation, I would go for refusal of this. I agree with some of the sentiments that you were describing in your presentation, and I would go along with the Perth and Kinross officers on point 1 and point 2. I think I'd like an amendment. I think we'll tidy that up.
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Elliott, we have a majority decision again. There's a trend starting to set in here, I think. 2-1 to refuse.
Yes, Commissioner.
Finally.
Yes, Commissioner. I've got obviously the minority opinion by Councillor Illingworth was to grant, and of course majority was to refuse. And you've really gone in line with the appointed officer apart from you're wanting a change, and I think it's the ground refusal number 2.
Yes,
and I'm going to guess it's removing the reference to policy 1B.
that is correct.
Not being
yes.
relevant,
No,
so
no.
it would be amended to policy 1A, then lead on to policy 7B.
That's it.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. So that now brings us to the last paper, which is 4.6. Now this is another flat being proposed for a short-term let. Change of use. Now, again, this is one of those papers which, of course, the dates of this preempt the approval of the non-statutory guidance, which were approved on the 1st of November, and the items before us dated October. The decision notice is 3rd of October. So, members, we're back in the same situation we were with number 4.4, which was no head. And on that basis, save Mrs. Tierney's voice and go through it all again. May I suggest that we to the same procedure, which we're going to have to do to be consistent, and that is to defer this case to go back to development management. We review it in light of the non-statutory guidance, then pass it out for comments from the applicant, and then return it to the LRB for final decision. Are we both in agreement with that? Yes, Stuart?
Happy to defer.
We do that. Mr. Elliott, we're on the deferment again. You'll get the perfect wording again to read out.
Yes, you'll be glad to know I'm not going to repeat it. It's the same wording as the earlier deferral, so it's
Fine.
there as you've outlined.
Thank you very much. Okay, members. So that now brings us to the end of this local review body. Remains only for me to thank Councillor Leaworth. I think Councillor Stewart has stepped in as a reserve to be here with us. Mr. Elliott, of course, Mr. Williams, and especially Mrs. Tierney, as it's her first time.
Thank you, convener.
Hopefully we will see her back on the next one in March, but if you are, we know we're fast. Thank you all, and I'm closing.